As a ringleader, I guess you call him the ringleader of the Club Kids, Michael Alig has been on and in the scene for over 10 years. He's the only Club Kid veteran from our previous reports on this topic. Now, Michael Alig's style has changed every time he's been here. His current look, if you look closely, is sort of, what do you call that, accident victim drug addict. He proudly wears at other times phony neck braces, fake black eyes, made-up open sores, and hypodermic marks on his arms. Now, why, Michael? What's this new look all about?
I guess I'm bored. I don't know.
I love the bruises. The bruises have a nice touch.
Do they look real?
Yes, they do. All right. No, I actually know Michael's mother. I met her.
Hi, my name is Madison, and you are listening to or watching Who's Knocking? Yet another true crime podcast. Today, I have a new story for you, and just to put it out there, I would highly recommend that if you are going to engage in this episode, that you do it on YouTube. There is going to be a lot of visual components to this, so just a recommendation. If you're on Apple or Spotify or whatever, you're always welcome to go back on the YouTube video and go see all the videos. There will be sound, of course, but there's a lot of video clips. Hope everybody is well. Blah, blah, intro. Let's get into it. So today I will tell you the story about the murder of Andre Angel Melendez and his murderer, Michael Alig. I don't know. I know this is a pretty popular case, but it's a bit older, so I don't know. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but it's a situation that was very much in the public eye, but very much so in the 90s, I guess you could say. It happened in the 90s. But it's a cautionary tale that really exemplifies when that feeling of drug-fueled youthful superiority can lead to truly horrific consequences. And this story has been the subject of many documentaries, books, movies. So let's dive in, shall we? It's New York City, and the 80s were just wrapping up. Andy Warhol had died unexpectedly in 1987, and with his death, so too did die the Studio 54 scene and everything that went with it. Here is Truman Capote on Studio 54, a little crossover for you.
I like it because it's really the nightclub of the future. It's a kind of culmination of a sort of nightclub that's been arriving gradually for the last 10 years.
So that whole era of nightlife died with the death of Andy Warhol. And it wasn't long before there was something new, something exciting, and something that would completely take nightlife and the club scene in New York City and eventually in other cities completely by storm. And at the very center of this new scene was a young man named Michael Alig. Now, Michael Alig was born on April 29th, 1966, and he was raised in South Bend, Indiana. Not exactly a cultural epicenter by any means, and not the most welcoming community, especially at the time, for a young, budding gay boy. And that is exactly who Michael was. And it was apparent to the children around him. Michael was a good kid. He did very well in school, but he was bullied quite mercilessly. He had one older brother, and his parents were divorced when he was about 4 years old, but he did seem to have like a very good relationship with at least his mother. Michael Alig graduated from high school in 1984, and at that point he decided to seek more liberal surroundings. So Michael started out at Fordham University in New York City, where he was studying architecture. But before long, he left Fordham University and transferred to the Fashion Institute of Technology. And that is where he started meeting other like-minded artsy folks, being able to express himself in ways that he never could before. He could be openly gay and literally nothing would happen. Not that it was like totally cool, but of all places in the entire United States, I'm sure New York City was if not the best, like top 3 to be in for a young gay man. It was there that he met the boyfriend of Keith Haring, who was an artist, if you're unaware, who introduced Michael to the nightlife scene in New York. Michael was completely entranced by it. As soon as he saw it, he knew, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. The parties, the people. I gathered that what really attracted Michael to most of the scene, and there were many scenes within the nightlife category, many different niches and things you'd barely even fathom, was that it really didn't matter what you looked like, what your sexual orientation was, or your gender. If you were confident and you could develop your own style and essentially be fabulous, you could be accepted and adored. And Michael very much wanted to be adored. Very much. So Michael dropped out of school and he got the first job he could at a nightclub. He was hired at a club called Danceteria as a busboy. And Danceteria was like a pretty big thing at the time. Yeah, it was a big club. And while working at this very cool club, surrounded by very cool people, Michael he was very desperate to be friends with all these people. He studied everything. He looked at how it worked, how the business of the club ran, how people made money. There was the business aspect of it, but it was also like there was a cool factor, and it was like, why did somebody become cool? Why did they, like what about them made other people like them or want to be around them? Because it is part of it is like, you can have a business strategy and say, if you do A, B, and C, and if you put this much money into it, you can get this return, whatever. That's one aspect. But another aspect is like that intangible cool factor, I guess you could say, that somebody has to elude in order to attract other people to you. So I think both of those things Michael was really focusing on. Michael soon met another club-going guy named James St. James. Here is James explaining ketamine in the documentary Party Monster, a shockumentary.
I remember the first couple times I ever did it, and I was like, this is awful. Why on earth would I want to, feel like I'm underwater, Once you get past the K-hole, you can go into, like, K-land, which is what I call it. And that's where, like, all of a sudden you're Queen Victoria, traipsing around Buckingham Palace, and you don't really know where you are, you don't really know who you are or what's going on, but it doesn't matter. Everything sort of makes sense, even though nothing makes sense. And it's a gorgeous feeling, and that's what we've all been searching for, all the club kids, is to, have our own little world.
Now, his real name was James Clark, and James came from a very wealthy, well-to-do family. He had already made a name for himself in the New York club scene, and Michael really looked up to James, and he really wanted to learn from James and to thrive in the party scene the way that James already had. James and Michael's relationship and the events that we will talk about were centered in the indie film Party Monster, starring Macaulay Culkin playing Michael Alig and Seth Green as James St. James.
I want you to teach me how to be fabulous.
We have nothing in common.
We both bite our nails. Please, don't go. I don't have any friends. I just got here. I just got off the bus.
The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. Blake, William, that's really all you need to know. That and don't dream it, be it.
Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's my favorite. And will you sign my copy of Slated? You look so good in it.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Now, the film received mixed reviews, but it's become somewhat of a cult classic among certain crowds. And Michael himself gave it a B+ for whatever that's worth. I've watched most of it. I kind of like it, even though it's kind of stupid. But anyway, initially, James and his crowd kind of rejected Michael. He was a nobody. He's from South Bend, Indiana, and he was obviously, like, kind of desperate. But Michael persisted, and he begged and pleaded his way into the good graces of one of the nightclub owners and was given an opportunity to throw a party of his own. And it wasn't long before Michael became a club promoter, and things kind of took off from there. And eventually, James and his crew took Michael in, and Michael and James St. James became kind of super best friends. Which brings us to the club kids.
And now to introduce the new looks is one of the New York Club kids, right?
Personality.
Hello. Richie Rich.
Hello. How you doing?
What is a club kid 90s?
Okay, a club kid is all about just being free with yourself and expressing yourself. And the clubs really are an outlet, like a vehicle to live your dreams. And some people are really ambitious. Others just live for themselves in the moment and in the club. And club kids are really anything they want to be. That's what's so great about it. It's all up for grabs.
How old are they, the average age?
The average age, I'd say, oh gosh, between 18 and 38.
Started as a pretty small group of super young kids, many of whom were under the drinking age. And they would come to clubs and dress just outrageously, very clown-like, and they would like follow Michael around while he threw these like ridiculous parties and events and like kind of be his entourage in a sense. And they were just like, they just decided that they were really cool, and like they went with it, and like I think everybody was like, oh, like this is cool. And they kind of took over the club scene in New York and began to grow. It was often young people from all walks of life, but many of whom were every type of sexual orientation or gender, and there was like lots of people in drag, like men dress as women, women dress as men, didn't matter. Lots of artists, budding fashion designers, models, and many, many bored trust funders. I'll just say it's interesting because it's true. It really brought in like every kid from a small town who heard about it would just show up and start becoming a club kid. But there was also like the wealthy, affluent kids of New York City, right? So there was a lot of money involved and probably a lot of, I wouldn't say poverty, but a lot of less well-off as well. So these kids would spend their nights partying and dancing away and doing a lot of drugs. Cannot underestimate the amount of drugs. Okay, there was a lot of drugs. All well dressed up, like, well, you can see if you're watching what they were dressed like. And it was crazy. They dressed in these elaborate costumes. Most of the main players would create a character and like go by a different name, like there was James St. James. And they would almost create a brand for themselves. Michael always went by his own name. There's a lot of people who you may still know about now who started in the scene and still go by that name. Like RuPaul came up in this crowd. Amanda Lepore like still kind of does that stuff. There was a guy named Richie Rich who is seen in a lot of these clips, and he is a designer now. I think his stuff's kind of bad, but James St. James is still around and goes by James St. James. A lot of these people, it's a mix between like people who became very successful like RuPaul, and a lot of these people did end up kind of being washed up, but that is besides the point at this point. But yeah, they kind of like would create a brand for themselves and like a character that people who would then like get to know, and you would see them at clubs, and it was almost like they were mini celebrities. The term celebutante was thrown around quite a bit. Now, the clothing or costumes or wardrobe, whatever you want to call it, often had inspiration from anything, like, first of all, literally anything, but I notice there's a lot of clownery, like punk and gothic looks. There's a lot of like very like high fashion, futuristic stuff. And then especially as they went further along, there was a lot more like shocking looks. There was nudity, like sometimes people's boobs would be out. There's a lot of like fake blood. Michael himself would often be seen later in this point of his life with like fake bruises and blood, like looking like an abuse victim. Nothing went too far and nothing was off limits, and often there was a lot of shock value for whatever they were doing, whether that was in the outfits or the parties or any aspect of it. The club owners and how it worked, the club owners would pay Michael to bring his band of club kids to their clubs to like party and mingle with regular people. They would provide these kids with drugs and or it wasn't that the clubs would provide them with drugs, but the clubs would also like pay drug dealers to be there to provide drugs and drinks and whatever. Very not legal. There was often, especially down the road, often like the police would come and like stake out the place, and it was, everyone was aware that there was a lot of drugs, and it did get to be quite out of hand. Yeah, so they would pay these kids to come, and then Michael and some of the promoters would throw different parties, different themed parties, and host shows and things, and that was the entertainment, and pretty much their presence was also the entertainment. Now, in these clubs, like, it was crazy. Well, they describe it as, like, it was crazy, and you never know, like, you know, I think a lot of people like to talk about their youth as, like, wow, it was so, like, we were so crazy, it was nuts, and it's like, I don't know. I'm sure it was, but I think a lot of it was more like people were just there to be seen, you know? But the claim is that there was like nudity and like people having sex out in the open, and the shows had some really fucked up acts. Like Michael threw a party where it was just people drinking their own pee, and like there was, you know, women who would shoot milk out of their boobs, and very like high shock value. There was like a dirty mouth contest. There was like hot body contests. Again, nothing went too far. Michael once threw a show or a party in honor of John Bobbitt, where they served hot dogs. And I don't know if you know who John Bobbitt is. If you're into true crime, you might. He is the guy whose wife, Lorna or something, she chopped off his penis because he was abusing her. So the hot dogs were not in very good taste, but that's the type of thing. And he talked about doing a show or a party for Tonya Harding that was like a club thing, and, you know. Anyway, so this was a boundary crossing crowd, boundary pushing. It was its own little universe, and Michael was really the king of that universe. He was making good money, he was throwing parties and promoting clubs, and he had this little entourage who just worshipped at his feet, and he went wild with it. And you do have to give it to him because he was quite innovative. At one point, he started throwing these like parties that he would advertise through like word of mouth and flyers. Remember, there was no social media at the time, and they called them Outlaw Parties. And this is where he would, by word of mouth, let like up to 1,000 people know that everybody was going to gather in some sort of public space, whether it was a McDonald's or a Burger King or a subway platform, and they'd all come there, they'd party, they'd bring music and drinks and probably all be on drugs, for like half an hour, and they'd leave just before the cops got there and just like cause a huge shitstorm. I mean, I haven't worked at a fast food restaurant, but I've worked in restaurants and service jobs, and like those poor people who had to clean up after all these assholes I just feel so bad for. But it was cool. It was super cool. The club kids eventually became a huge phenomena. Here are some clips from the Geraldo show in 1990.
I want you parents at home to picture this. Your daughter or your son is going out on the town tonight. Do you know what they'll be wearing? Any idea? Where they'll be going? What they'll be doing? Moms and pops, do you recognize your child in this studio crowd? And what a crowd it is. Whatever happened to yuppies and the new conservative movement and the whole AIDS-driven age of innocence? Have we come back to the bold, bare, boisterous basics of nightlife? Is the AIDS scare and all the others passé? For better or worse, have our youngsters return to the 70s style sex, drugs, and rock and roll? Go to Michael on the right from Indiana. Now, what do your old friends in Indiana, do you expect? What are they thinking watching you right now? Love your haircut. I mean, it's just sensational.
Well,
low maintenance. I see that. It's great.
I don't know. I guess they're jealous because I'm having a lot of fun and they're not. I'm making a lot of money, having a lot of fun, and they're not.
I get the orange ears and the pink nose, but why the lipstick?
I'm not wearing any lipstick.
These kids kind of made their rounds on these daytime talk shows. There was a big mix of intrigue and disgust and adoration. And like any kind of art or new thing, there's obviously always going to be like the old people who are like, this is crazy, and the, young people who are dying to be a part of it, and it's fascinating. And it was, but it was also like, it was like, parents, do you know where your kids are at 4 a.m.? Like, they could be these kids. Like, it was in some way a cautionary tale, and I think mostly because there was so much drugs. You can see Michael and the gang on TV over the years, and they definitely got more confident as things went on. In the beginning, they would mostly deny doing drugs. Everyone admitted that they were around drugs, but it seemed like most kids would proudly declare, like, oh, I don't do drugs. It's just everyone else. But it's like, then who is everyone else? And it seemed a little unrealistic to me because I'm pretty sure they were all just pretty much all doing drugs.
These are the club kids. They live in a world of sexual disorientation, drug-induced states of euphoria, and glamour, a kind of glamour beyond belief. Now, usually they come out only at night when the rest of the world is fast asleep. Well, we woke them up to bring you the New York, hi honey, love your propellers. Very nice, very lovely. To bring him to your home. Hi honey, nice to see you. So, prance on, hello, very nice to see you. Welcome to my show. Hi, nice to see you. Hi. That's a good look. Very nice. Yes, hi, come on, that's it. I love the mustache. Oh, yeah, please. Very nice. Nice shoes. You're tall, very tall. Come on. Come on, grab a seat. Come on, you winged Valkyrie there. As a ringleader, I guess you call him the ringleader of the club kids, Michael Alig has been on and in the scene for over 10 years. He's the only club kid veteran from our previous reports on this topic. Now, Michael Alig's style has changed every time he's been here. His current look, if you look closely, is sort of, what do you call that, accident victim drug addict. He proudly wears at other times phony neck braces, fake black eyes, made-up open sores, and hypodermic marks on his arms. Now, why, Michael? What's this new look all about?
I guess I'm bored. I don't know.
I love the bruises. The bruises have a nice touch.
Do they look real?
Yes, they do. All right. I actually know Michael's mother. So how are things in your life, Michael, these many years after you started?
Things are just great, Geraldo. How are things in your life?
Oh, fine, thanks. Fine. I've yet to come and see you in your native habitat.
What time do you go to bed?
10 or 11 when you get up.
Me too, 10 a.m.
Yeah, that's right, in the morning. How is being a professional club kid? I mean, you really are. I mean, you stage parties and events now. You're very well known. People hire you to bring kids to their private
Beauty
parties.
is in the eye of the person who signs a paycheck.
Ah. All right, now they do have parties, different parties, and I want you. This will give you an idea of their collective senses of humor when I tell you some of the parties that the Michael and the kids have coming up. First of all, there's the Cutting Edge of Love that's being held in the Lorena Bobbitt room.
That's my party.
And is it that Club USA?
We haven't decided whether we do that at USA or Limelight yet. It's a party for Wayne Bobbitt.
It's a party.
It's a dinner party. We're going to serve hot dogs and. Can you believe he agreed to do it?
And then there's the Party Harding. The Party Harding. I guess that's in honor of Tanya Harding, the ice skater. Now, what's the theme of the Party Harding?
It's a club party. Get it? Club.
Oh. Doink, 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 doink.
Will you turn that?
And then there's the Jackson Fondle Rama.
Oh, that was a long time ago. It was actually pinned that. Will you turn that?
I'm taking the batteries out.
It was a pin that. Can I say on camera? Pin the on Michael Jackson. That was right. That was before we found out. But we didn't really find out.
That was for Thanksgiving.
It was while he was in Europe doing whatever it was he was doing. We had a pin that. And then we had all different colors where you could put the one that you thought fit Michael Jackson.
You can see in a lot of these old clips that. A lot of these kids had a very, like, high and mighty attitude, Michael especially. I think a lot of that is a result of their age. They're all super young, and many of them came from very wealthy families, and they felt really on top of the world, like they were creating something new and cool, and they were better than everyone else, and like nobody had done this before. You can tell that a lot of them came from kind of a similar background to Michael. They maybe grew up in a small town, and they were either gay or in some way different, and probably got bullied quite a bit. And now they were a part of this like very cool crowd that accepted them for the things that made them weird where they came from. And so I think a lot of them kind of had a chip on their shoulder in that sense, which I do think makes sense. And I don't blame them for it. Also, like, they're just young. They think they know everything. They don't. And it's very easy to be arrogant when you're a young person. I know I was. And in some ways, the club kid scene was super open and accepting of all different types of people. It was full of art and creativity and fun. But at the same time, there were hierarchies and elites within the crowd, and crazy drug and alcohol abuse, and a pretty big chunk of them were just bored rich kids. And there were a lot of accusations of racism. And in the end, murder. Which brings me to Angel Melendez. Now, Andre, or better known in his club kid phase as Angel, was like the rest of them. His family had immigrated to the United States from Colombia when he was only 8 years old. And like a lot of the club kids, he was a young gay kid who never really fit in where he was until he found the club kids. And when Andre hit that scene, he was not accepted much by Michael and his friends. They were a pretty exclusive bunch, and very soon, Angel, wanting to really fit in, began selling drugs. He did this at several nightclubs, and this really increased his popularity, as you would guess. Andre did get himself into the main crowd of the club kids, and he was seen on many of the talk shows in the audience. It was impossible to miss him because his stage name, as I said, was Angel, and I guess it's not really a stage name, but whatever, I come from acting, so that's what I call it. And he always wore a huge set of angel wings. And he had different kinds and whatever, but his look was quite consistent. And what I find most tragic about Angel is that even within a community that bragged about how inclusive and how open-minded they were, it was obvious that they never did accept Angel, no matter how much he wished they would.
Hello from New York. Hi, girl. See, at the Outlaw Party.
In the documentary Glory Days, a lot of the older club kids who were in with Michael and were considered very cool at the time, they all shit all over Angel, and it was super gross to listen to be honest, but I mean, at least they were honest about their thoughts, I guess. They talked about how they never really liked him, and they made fun of his angel wings and talked about how paranoid he was that people were making fun of him behind his back, which isn't crazy because they were. So I don't know, I find it really awful, just like the way that some people still talk about him online. Like if you go on like Tumblr and look up Angel Melendez, like you see so many people memorializing him and stuff like that, but it's the people who are actually there were such dicks to him. And I do think what I gather from listening to them talk about it, like, I don't know, I think a lot of people know, like, you know, a person in their life who's got like a kind of a weird personality that like for some reason is like kind of off-putting, and like they're like awkward in a way, and like maybe you don't really understand why. Maybe it's like a desperate aspect of them where they like try too hard and like come off as ingenuine or something. Like I gather that like that is what they thought of him. And you know, that happens. That's part of life and social interactions. And you know, I don't necessarily blame people for like being off put by another person. That's not crazy. It's just like the way they talk about him after he's died to me is like it's quite a bit gross. I don't, nobody has to like everybody. I don't think if you don't like somebody, doesn't make you a bad person. But, and because I kind of have, I struggle with it too, because I also, I'm bothered when people talk only glowingly about people who are dead. It's like, I be accurate. Not every single murder victim was like an angel walking on this earth. But, you don't have to be a dick, right? So by March of 1996, Michael Alig was nearly 30 years old, meaning he was quite old for a club kid. He was still kind of up there on the scene, number one. I don't know if he was like the best and only person. He was aging. He was still out there doing his thing. At this point, though, Michael was heavily addicted to heroin and doing lots of other drugs, including meth, which was not cute. But, he just dressed himself like an abuse victim and made that fashion. So I guess maybe that hit it. But now, at this point, Michael Alig had spent close to 10 years doing a lot of drugs and partying all night. And I have to assume he was starting to feel the consequences of that. So the event which we're going to talk about took place on March 17th, 1996. And this is Michael's version of events. So that evening, or sometime during that day, Michael, had got word that the DEA was planning a raid that night at the club that they were partying at, and he was told that all the drug dealers would be arrested. And so he says that he told all the drug dealers not to show up that night and basically told everybody to stay away. Angel, he says, came anyway, and he came to the club at around 2 a.m., and Michael told the door people not to let him in, and he makes it sound today as if it was like for Angel's own good. He was trying to protect him because Michael didn't want Angel to get arrested. But for whatever reason, and he claims it was drug related, he was not able to properly relay this message to Angel. So Angel just thought that he was not letting him in. And we know that Angel really always felt paranoid that people didn't like him or didn't want him around. So I have to assume, and I'm pretty sure Angel was on drugs as well, we have to assume that he took this very personally. So Angel was very upset, and Michael then claims that at approximately 10 a.m., Angel showed up at the apartment at 11th Avenue and 43rd Street that Michael shared with a guy named Robert Riggs, who went by the name Freeze. Now, this apartment was Michael's. It was provided to him by club owners as part of his payment for all the work he did. Sorry, that was rude. I guess it was work. People do this as work. I'm not judging. Look what I'm doing. I'm not even getting paid. Anyway, Angel was demanding his money, which Michael claims was in a safe at the club. So he didn't have it. So Angel was trying to get him to go to the club to get his money, but Michael, it was 10 a.m., which basically is the equivalent of bedtime for these kids. And again, Michael is not a kid at this point. Michael is a grown ass. She should be 29 at this point. So that's my age. Michael was, quote, just coming off of a 4-day binge on cocaine, Special K, heroin, and crystal meth, end quote. And so he was pretty out of it. That's a lot of drugs. And that's a lot of nasty drugs. Yeah, that's meth and heroin. Oof. Oof. So Angel was in the apartment. Freeze was there, and he apparently at some point started making fun of Angel for always wearing the same hat and angel wings, was poking fun at him, and Michael and Angel began to push each other around a little bit. Michael wrote a long article for the New York Post explaining everything, so I'm going to take this quote from the article that he wrote. Quote, "There was a scuffle and I went flying through a glass china cabinet. A large piece of glass pierced my back and blood spurted everywhere. Angel started biting me and Freeze tried to pull him off. Freeze reached for a hammer that was lying on a nearby table and hit him with the wooden end of the handle of the hammer. Angel fell to the floor. We sat on top of him, and wrapping a sweatshirt around my hand, I smashed it into Angel's face. We were all high on ketamine. Maybe it was the combination of me doing it for too long or having more strength than I realized, but Angel stopped writhing." End quote. Other accounts have said that Robert hit Angel on the head with a hammer and that Michael smothered him with a pillow until he stopped breathing. Michael, to this day, still claims that it was not the metal end of the hammer, but it was the wooden end of the hammer. And according to the autopsy report, it was the smothering that killed Angel. So, I just think regardless of what end Robert hit Angel with a hammer, it was Michael who did technically end Angel's life. I'm pretty sure. And Michael does admit that. I'm sure the exact details of what really happened would be nearly impossible to ever parse out, especially because all three were on drugs. And as we'll see later, the whole story doesn't come out till maybe 9 months or so later. So you've got some kids who are, not kids, grown men, super high on drugs, which I'm sure has to affect your memory in some ways. And then you kind of lose that over the months, and you'll see. But we do know a hammer hit this guy 3 times, and then he was smothered to death by Michael Alig. And after he died, the 2 men stripped Angel down and put him in their bathtub on ice for approximately 5 to 7 days. They tried to ignore what they had done. They kept doing drugs and partying and really hoping that it was all just a dream. They tried covering him with cleaning products. They had Drano and baking soda. So they covered him with that, hoping to disguise the smell. But when it became too disgusting to ignore, Michael did a bunch of heroin. He and Robert, between the 2 of them, they acquired 2 chef's knives and a cleaver. And Robert said that he couldn't do it, so he gave Michael a bunch of heroin to be the one to do it. And Michael dismembered Angel himself. Michael chopped off both of Angel's legs, and they wrapped those legs in garbage bags and then put them in duffel bags and then disposed of them in the Hudson River. Then they took the top half of Angel and they wrapped him in a garbage bag and then in a bed sheet, and then they put him in a cardboard box that had held a TV, so a very large cardboard box, and they dragged that box down to the lobby of the building. They got in a cab with that box. The cab driver dropped them off at the Hudson River, and they threw that box in the Hudson River. And then they waited, and they continued to party and dick around. And Michael went around telling people that he killed Angel.
We did tell people, and it was a combination of things. It's a very complex thing that when you do something so horrific and monumental in a horrific way, and unfathomable, and just overwhelming. I told people, because in a way I felt, and this is really selfish, but drug addicts are selfish people. I told my friends in an awful way because I felt like I was sharing the burden of responsibility now. It wasn't just me that had this awful secret, now my friends did too, and it was a little bit of a weight off my shoulders. And then it turned into, when a lot of people knew about it, then it turned into something more like, well, let's tell everybody we did, because then people started questioning, did you do it? So then it was more like, well, let's say that we did it, so they think we didn't do it, So it was a little bit of everything, but one thing it wasn't was, we killed somebody and now you can't do anything about it. It wasn't that. And I think maybe some people think that it was. Nobody that knows us thinks that. But I think maybe people who don't know us might think that, and if they do, that's not true.
Now, once Michael did start telling people, it took a while, but he did become a pariah in the community. I think because a lot of people believed him. And it wasn't that he was just telling people. He was really telling people in his own way.
I remember being at Michael's and like setting a cocktail down on this box, and Michael was wearing Angel's boots, right, like I am with my legs crossed, and sitting in front of me and wearing Angel's boots saying, "Astro, who's missing? Who's missing, Astro?" And I was like, "I don't know, Michael, but what is that stench in this house?" And the box that my cocktail was sitting on was Angel's body.
We were joking about Clara the chicken, and I said, "Oh, I wonder whatever happened to that costume." And then Michael said to me, "Oh, I cut it into pieces and threw it in the river."
Angel, it later became clear that he was missing. And it took a little while because, you know, he's off in New York, I'm sure kind of away from his family. Like we didn't have social media where like people were off social media, or like, you know, it's like, it wasn't that like people were texting him and he wasn't returning their calls. You could kind of just go anywhere, but it was not super long before people did realize that Angel was missing. And it was pretty awful because the police were really not doing anything about it. Yet rumors and speculation were flying everywhere because Michael was telling everybody. But I think a lot of the authorities and police, because of like who this scene was and the way that there was so much shock value and everybody constantly wanted attention, whether it was good or bad, a lot of people, or a lot of the, I think, authorities and police believed that anybody kind of copying to it, especially Michael, were just trying to do that for shock value or for clout, like they would do other shocking things. So they didn't really take Michael very seriously. And they actually, the police suspected that it was one of the club owners who was responsible. And they were actually trying to get Michael to testify against that club owner. And they wouldn't really listen to anybody who was saying that Michael was the person responsible. But within the club scene, at some point, Michael was no longer allowed in the clubs. Nobody was hiring him to throw parties. Nobody wanted him around because it did become obvious that he did have something to do with Angel's death. Journalists started writing about Angel's disappearance and started to vaguely place blame on people in the club scene. And although they didn't mention Michael by name, I think people knew who they were talking about. Angel's brother came down to the city to beg police for help, but it really wasn't until the box containing Angel's body washed up and was discovered by children that the police finally took things seriously, which is very messed up. In November of 1996, 8 months after the murder, detectives finally began to believe all the rumors, and they caught up with Michael, who was staying in a dirty motel room with his boyfriend doing a ton of heroin. Now, Riggs was also arrested, and he copped to the whole thing pretty quickly. And Michael tried to claim self-defense, saying that he was being attacked by Angel. And so, not thinking that they could get him on first-degree murder charges, the prosecution offered the both of them a plea deal of 10 to 20 years if they both pled guilty to manslaughter. And they agreed, and on October 1st of 1997, they were both sentenced to 10 to 20 years. And a stipulation of the sentence was that Michael is never allowed to contact Angel's family in any way. He's never allowed to have anybody contact them on his behalf. He's not allowed anything to do with them. Reasonable. So in prison, Michael was shuffled around quite a bit. He ended up being able to find a bunch of drugs, so he got in trouble a number of times for being found to be on heroin. He took part in a blog with James St. James for a while, where James would publish transcripts of their conversations online in his blog. Kind of seemed like Michael was just like doing his thing in prison. And because of this and getting in trouble for a lot of this, he did end up spending a lot of time in solitary confinement, mostly for the heroin. While in prison, Michael ended up getting a bunch of psychological evaluations, and the findings were interesting. Michael was reportedly diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder, and the clinician who made this diagnosis said that it was the worst case they had ever seen, which is pretty nuts. And just because it's interesting, here are the 8 factors that help to diagnose a person with HPD. Number 1, discomfort when they are not the center of attention. 2, inappropriate, sexually seductive, or provocative behavior. 3, rapidly shifting or shallow expression of emotion. 4, using physical appearance to draw attention to oneself. 5, excessively impressionistic speech. 6, self-dramatizing and theatrical behavior. 7, being suggestible. 8, evaluating relationships as more intimate than they actually are. Now, this doesn't explain the murder. People with this personality disorder, it seems kind of like similar, a little bit similar to narcissism. Just because you have this doesn't mean that you are necessarily violent. But it does explain a lot of his behavior. I think it explains why he told everybody after. He wanted their attention. And it was within his nature to act the way that he did. Robert Riggs was released from prison in 2010 and Michael in 2014. Michael was denied parole a few times before he was finally released. And as soon as he got out, like the second he, like literally the day he got out of prison, there was a documentary team there to capture it. He started doing interviews.
When I see footage of me from back then and how flippant and kind of, not exactly mean, but maybe arrogant, and it makes me cringe, honestly, and I feel like I have a lot of making up to do. I'm trying to reimagine myself or reinvent myself.
He was reconnecting with friends from his old life, including James St. James. He started a podcast with fellow club kid Ernie Glam.
Welcome to the Pew, where we're going to do a
special fact-checking
especially
edition.
stinky show.
It's our
something really smells today, and it smells like bullshit.
From fact to fiction and back to fact.
And transformations.
Baby got fact.
The transformation of the truth to something that is more closely related.
He's run out of quips.
Not the truth. Well, I don't want to use the word lie because that word has...
It's harsh.
It's harsh. It's a harsh word. So let's not use the word lie. We'll use the word untruth. And of course, we're talking about James St. James's book,
Disco Bloodbath.
Disco Bloodbath. So yes, so we have been. I hate to continually use the word inundated, but we have been inundated by questions from viewers wanting to know the truth and what is fact and what is fiction.
Yeah, like how you got Drano into the needle when you injected Angel.
Exactly.
I think it's obvious that Michael really did struggle to live in the outside world after 17 years in prison. He had no real skills. He was a murderer and everyone knew it. He said many times that he wouldn't be doing drugs anymore. But on Christmas Day of 2020, Michael Alig died of a heroin overdose. My personal take is that Michael would have been better off if he had remained in prison. Since he didn't actually repent in any meaningful way, his actions really weighed very heavily on him, I have to assume. In prison, at least, since he would still be like actively receiving a punishment, like it probably feels like you're like working towards something, towards some sort of redemption, or at least, you know, since it's mid-punishment, you don't really have to worry about forgiving yourself if you don't want to. Just being in prison probably felt like it all evened out. It was fair. It's a weird one. I don't really know what to think of Michael, to be honest. I think he's it's all a little complicated. I mean, I think he was very full of himself, and he was a huge asshole who used people and felt entitled to behave like he ruled the world. But I do see where that came from, not that is any sort of excuse for the fact that he brutally murdered somebody. Like, he's a bad person because he brutally murdered somebody. That's very clear. Do not do not think I'm trying to say otherwise. But I do think that his arrogance and his general demeanor maybe stemmed from his childhood bullying and his experience as a young gay kid in a small town. And that's just a simple guess as a simple layman, I suppose. And he definitely blamed everything on the drugs. Like he would say like, I took the drugs, so it is my fault. But I do think it's upsetting, or it's sad when you see somebody who clearly had the potential to like be creative and like make something of themselves, and like if it hadn't been for the drugs, like would he just have been like a regular successful guy and not been a murderer, and somebody's life would have been spared? Like, we'll never know, of course, but I think that possibility is pretty obvious. And, you know, I think the very worst part of this story is that Angel really gets glossed over, even admittedly in my own telling. And I think it's because there's not a whole lot on Angel out there. I could barely find anything from his family besides this clip of his poor brother.
Brother trusted these people so much. He trusted them so much. What am I gonna miss most of him? A lot of things, small things. I just gonna miss.
It's extremely sad because Angel died at what could be described, depending on who you ask, I suppose, as like at a pretty low point in his life. He was dealing drugs. He was like on the outside of the in crowd. He hadn't really found himself. He hadn't really found a group of people who really accepted him for who he was. And he never really got the chance to live up to his full potential. Like, he could have grown up and made something of himself and found people who really cared for him. Maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe not everyone does, but now we'll never know. And now his family has to live without him, and they, you know, got to watch Michael get out of prison. And, you know, he was out for 6 years before he eventually killed himself. And see, with Michael, I feel like I don't think any part of him is genuine. I think in a lot of his interviews, it's like he's trying to sound genuine, but he just really doesn't. And it's just like, if Angel's family ended up watching any of that, like I would have been so angry. He really, I think when you're the family of a victim, and I don't know, because this has not happened to me, so this is pure guess, and maybe I shouldn't do this, but I'm gonna, like, it is better for you as the victim to forgive for your own sake. Whether you can do it or not is your own thing, but it's less on your heart if you don't have to actively hate somebody, right? And so it's like the least you can do as the murderer is like it's like make that easier for them. Make it easier for them to forgive you by just fucking off. And Michael did not do that. He absolutely did not do that. Like, just leave. Just get out of here. And I guess in the end he did. But he did 6 years of like making the rounds. So that's the story. What do you think? Have you seen Party Monster? Did you think it was the cult classic that it claims to be? Or are you one of the people who voted for it to be 29% on Rotten Tomatoes? What do you think of the club kid scene? It was kind of crazy. And, like, you know, I don't blame all the club kids for the death of Angel. This was Michael and Robert Riggs. They are the ones who killed him. I don't ever like to blame an entire group of people for the actions of one or two of its members. I think it was pretty cool, but it was I just think young people, they're funny because they don't know anything and they think they know everything, and it's so draining. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Please feel free to subscribe to my channel. I'd love it if you did. And I will see you next week. Please stay safe, because you never know who is knocking. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.